There's a kind of intelligence that isn't learned in the barracks, and that night she was sitting in a corner, invisible, a worn notebook in her hands. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you enjoy stories that touch your heart and make you think, subscribe to the channel for exciting narratives every day. Now, let's get to the story. The headquarters stood like a fortress of concrete and silence in the heart of the capital. Its thick walls held not just weapons and secret documents, but also the arrogance of men who believed the nation's destiny was in their hands. For decades, the military regime had transformed that place into a temple of power, where uniforms mattered more than arguments, and ranks decided who had the right to speak. General Augusto Cardoso was, in everyone's eyes, the most brilliant strategist of his generation. Tall, with impeccable posture and a piercing gaze, he commanded with a mixture of iron discipline and mind games. He told his officers that a strong army wasn't made just of muscle and bullets, but of intelligence, anticipation, and cold calculation. That's why he had a habit of posing riddles during strategic meetings, challenges that tested not only his subordinates' reasoning, but also their courage. On that Saturday night, the headquarters grand hall was packed. Crystal chandeliers illuminated tables covered with white cloths, where high-ranking officers celebrated recent victories in civil control operations. The clinking of glasses mingled with hushed laughter and low conversations. Everything there exuded power, order, control. Behind the scenes, however, there was another world, a world without chandeliers, without applause, without a name. That's where Donna Lourdes worked, a black woman with calloused hands and a back bent by years of cleaning halls that were never meant for her. Every event night, she arrived 2 hours early to polish the floors, arrange the chairs, set the atmosphere. And every night she brought her daughter with her. The girl's name was Joanna. She was 13 with watchful eyes and an old notebook she carried everywhere. She had inherited that notebook from her grandmother, a teacher who never got to teach, prevented by poverty and prejudice. Inside it, Joanna drew maps, jotted down overheard phrases, scribbled connections between things that, to others, seemed unrelated. To her, the world was made of invisible patterns, lines that secretly intersected. While her mother wiped down the hall floor, Joanna sat in a discreet corner between heavy curtains and stacked chairs. There, she was a shadow. No one noticed her, no one asked her name, and so, in silence and invisibility, she observed everything. That night, something was different. The general seemed more tense, his officers more restless. There was an electric anticipation in the air, as if a storm was about to break. After dinner, General Cardoso stood up. The hall fell silent immediately. He walked to the center, where a large wooden table displayed a topographical map. Mountains, valleys, rivers, and roads depicted a fictional territory. But everyone knew this was more than a theoretical exercise. It was a test, an intellectual trap. "Gentlemen," the general began, his voice firm and clear, "tonight we don't just celebrate past victories. We celebrate the ability to think, and thinking under pressure is what distinguishes an ordinary soldier from a leader." He pointed to the map. "Before you lies a strategic valley. Our objective is to cross it carrying essential supplies, food, ammunition, medicine. However, the valley is full of traps, landmines, ambush points, unbridged rivers. We have limited resources, 100 men, 5 vehicles, 3 days. The question is simple. How do we cross without losing men, without wasting time, and still protect the supplies?" A heavy silence fell over the hall. Colonels, captains, and lieutenants exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some mentally sketched out answers, but none dared to speak. The general was known for publicly humiliating anyone who made a mistake. Better silence than ridicule. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. The general crossed his arms, a faint smirk of contempt on his face. "Not one of you," he taunted. 100 men under my command, and not one capable of solving a basic military logistics riddle. In the corner of the hall, hidden in shadows, Joanna watched everything. Her eyes scanned the map projected on the wall. She didn't understand war, didn't know what a landmine or an ambush was, but she understood patterns, she understood paths, she understood distributing weight so as not to break the floor. As the officers hesitated, she opened her notebook and began to draw. Curved lines, small circles, arrows that forked and converged. Her hand trembled slightly, but her reasoning was clear. She realized something none of the men in uniform had seen. The solution wasn't in force, but in synchronization. It wasn't necessary to cross the valley with all the men at once. It was necessary to divide. Small groups, each carrying only a portion of the supplies, moving along different routes, like rivers that fork but converge at the same destination. Without realizing it, she murmured softly, "You just have to divide, like water." The murmur echoed in the silence. All heads turned. General Cardoso frowned. Who spoke? Donna Lourdes froze, bucket in hand. Her heart pounded. Joanna, realizing her mistake, tried to shrink herself even further. But it was too late. Who spoke? The general repeated, now walking toward the voice. That's when he saw her, a thin black girl in a worn school uniform, a worn notebook in her lap, sitting in a corner as if she didn't belong there. The general stopped in front of Joanna. His eyes dropped from her face to the open notebook. Maps, lines, rudimentary but precise calculations. He raised an eyebrow. "What did you say?" Joanna swallowed hard. She felt her mother's hand grip her shoulder, a gesture that was half protection, half plea. Say nothing more. But something inside her wouldn't allow silence. Perhaps it was the memory of her grandmother, who always said that knowledge doesn't ask permission. Perhaps it was simply the stubbornness of someone who had spent her life being invisible and, for the first time, had been seen. "I said," her voice came out trembling but firm, "you just have to divide, like water." Muffled laughter arose from some officers. The general raised his hand, demanding silence. "Explain." Joanna took a deep breath. She stood up slowly, holding the notebook with both hands. She walked to the table where the map was displayed. All eyes followed her, some with curiosity, others with disdain. "You said you have 100 men and 5 vehicles, right?" she began, her voice still low. "If everyone goes together, they'll draw attention. They'll step on traps. They'll be slow." She pointed to the map. "But if they split into small groups, 5 groups of 20 men, each taking a vehicle and a portion of the supplies, they can move faster. And if each group takes a different route, bypassing the danger zones." She drew in the air with her finger, tracing the lines she'd sketched in her notebook. "They'll reach the end of the valley almost at the same time, like rivers that diverge, but meet again. No one notices because they're small, but together, at the end, they form a complete army again." The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't discomfort, it was awe. The general leaned over the map. His eyes scanned the imaginary routes the girl had described. He picked up a red pencil and began to trace the lines. One group through the north, another through the south, a third skirting the river. 2 reserve groups, converging at the final point. The logic was impeccable. He looked up at Joanna. "Where did you learn this?" "I didn't learn it, sir. I just looked." One of the colonels stepped forward, indignant. "General, with all due respect, this is a child. She cannot—" "Silence!" The general's voice cut through the air like a blade. He continued to stare at Joanna. "Continue." She hesitated but went on. "It's just, my grandmother was a teacher. She used to say, everything in the world has a pattern. Water finds a way. Ants divide the load. Birds fly in flocks, but each one knows its position. Strategy isn't about strength. It's about fitting together." The general remained motionless. Then, slowly, something unprecedented happened. He took a step back, He raised his right hand and he saluted a 13-year-old girl, the daughter of a janitor, who should never have had a voice in this room. The general's gesture echoed through the hall like silent thunder. No one dared to move, no one breathed audibly. General Augusto Cardoso's right hand remained raised, firm, in a position of military respect, a gesture reserved only for superiors, heroes of war, or moments of extreme honor. And there he stood, saluting a child. A younger officer, confused, stepped forward as if to question. But before he could open his mouth, the general lowered his hand and said, calmly, "Everyone, stand." The soldiers obeyed. Colonels, captains, lieutenants, sergeants. One by one they rose from their chairs. The sound of boots against the marble floor echoed through the hall. And then, in a synchronized movement, like a military choreography, everyone raised their right hand. A salute. To Joanna. The girl felt her legs weaken. She didn't know where to look. She didn't know if she should return the gesture, if she should lower her head, if she should disappear. But something inside her, perhaps her grandmother's spirit, perhaps the silent dignity her mother carried, even while bent over buckets and brooms, made her stand firm, holding her notebook against her chest. Donna Lourdes, standing a few feet behind, dropped her bucket. The sound of water spilling onto the floor broke the silence. She brought her hands to her face, her eyes welling up. For the first time in 20 years of working in this barracks, she wasn't invisible. Not because someone had noticed her, but because her daughter, her girl, had been seen, truly seen. The general lowered his hand and addressed Joanna again. "What's your name?" "Joanna, sir." "Joanna," he repeated, as if etching it in stone. "You've just solved in 5 minutes what my best strategists couldn't in an hour. And you did it without training, without a uniform, without rank, just with," he pointed to the notebook, "observation." He turned to the officers. "Gentlemen, tonight we've learned a lesson no military manual teaches. Intelligence doesn't wear a uniform. It has no color. It doesn't ask permission. It simply exists. And when we ignore it out of pride, prejudice, or arrogance, we lose not just battles, we lose the war against our own ignorance." One of the older colonels stepped forward. His face was red, not with anger, but with shame. "General, I apologize. On behalf of all of us." Another officer nodded, and another, and another. Gradually, the hall transformed into a silent confessional. The general turned back to Joanna. "Will you continue studying?" "I will, sir." "If I can?" "You will," he said, pulling a card from his pocket. "This is my direct contact. If anyone tries to stop your studies, if you need support, find me. Consider it an order." Joanna took the card with both trembling hands. She read the printed name, General Augusto Cardoso, National Strategic Command. "And you," the general addressed Donna Lourdes, "you've raised a brilliant mind. That's not luck. That's work. That's love. That's sacrifice. The country should thank you." Donna Lourdes couldn't respond. She simply bowed her head, tears streaming down her face. The general clapped his hands once, ending the moment. "Meeting adjourned. Everyone may leave. Except you, Joanna. Stay for 1 more minute." The officers left in silence, some still visibly shaken. Donna Lourdes stayed beside her daughter, protective. When the hall emptied, the general approached again. This time his voice was softer, almost paternal. "Do you know why I posed that riddle?" Joanna shook her head. "Because I wanted to humble them. I wanted to prove that even the best can fail." He sighed. "But you taught me something else. That true leadership isn't about proving superiority. It's about recognizing greatness wherever it appears." He extended his hand. Joanna hesitantly shook it. "Thank you, Joanna. You've changed something here today. Something no order, no medal, no promotion could change." In the days that followed, the story spread through the barracks corridors like wildfire. Officers who hadn't been present at the banquet heard the account from colleagues. Enlisted men whispered in disbelief. Some called it a legend, others swore they'd seen it. But all agreed on one point. Something had changed. Donna Lourdes continued cleaning the main hall, but now when she entered, soldiers saluted her. Some apologized for years of invisibility. Others, younger ones, asked about Joanna. The girl, in turn, became an almost mythical figure. Not in a celebrity sense. She still attended the same public school, wore the same worn uniform. But there was something different in the way she walked, her spine straighter, her gaze firmer, the notebook, once hidden, now carried with pride. 2 weeks after the incident, General Cardoso called an extraordinary meeting. All high-ranking officers were present. He entered the hall carrying a wooden box. "Gentlemen, today we establish a new tradition in this barracks." He opened the box. Inside, a new notebook bound in leather with the Army's insignia embossed on the cover. From today onward, this notebook will be awarded annually to the civilian who, without military training, presents the most creative solution to a strategic challenge. We'll call it the Joanna Lourdes da Silva Award. Applause echoed through the hall. And the first recipient, the general continued, will of course be Joanna herself. He signaled. The door opened. Joanna entered, accompanied by her mother. This time, there was no fear, no trembling. She walked to the center of the hall where the general awaited her. "Joanna, you taught us that intelligence doesn't need a uniform, that strategy can spring from an old notebook, that the most important voice can come from someone who's never been heard before." He handed her a new notebook. "This one is yours. Use it wisely." She held the notebook with both hands, her eyes shining. "Thank you, sir. But," she hesitated, "I'm going to keep using my old notebook too. It was a gift from my grandmother." The general smiled. For the first time, a genuine smile, without irony, without calculation. "Of course, the best gifts are never the most expensive. They're the ones that carry history." Joanna looked at her mother. Mrs. Lourdes nodded, moved. And then, unexpectedly, Joanna did something no child her age should be capable of. She gave a speech. "My grandmother used to say that knowledge is like a seed. It doesn't matter where it falls. If it finds good soil, it grows." She held up the old notebook. "This notebook is good soil, and I promise I'll plant everything I've learned in it. And one day, I'll teach other kids. Because if I, the daughter of a cleaner, could be here today, then any child can." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It wasn't discomfort, it wasn't astonishment, it was respect, pure and absolute. The officers saluted again. And this time, it wasn't an order. It was a choice. 5 years passed. Joanna graduated high school with honors and, thanks to a scholarship funded by a military foundation, enrolled in Federal University to study systems engineering. Her old notebook, now accompanied by the new one, went with her to every class. Mrs. Lourdes continued working at the base, but her path had changed. The general, now promoted to Secretary of Defense, created a continuing education program for civilian employees of the armed forces. Lourdes was the first to enroll. At 45, she learned to read fluently, and at 48, she completed elementary school. The Joanna Lourdes da Silva Award became a national benchmark. Annually, children and young people from marginalized neighborhoods, inner cities, indigenous villages and black settlements were invited to present creative solutions to complex problems. Many winners received scholarships. Some became scientists, others teachers. All carried the same lesson: intelligence has no fixed address. On a sunny autumn morning, Joanna returned to headquarters, not as a visitor, but as a speaker. At 18, she had been invited to speak on collaborative strategies in high-pressure environments, the subject of her academic research. The grand hall was packed. Generals, officers, cadets, and civilians too, Professors, students, janitors, cooks. For the first time, the base gates were open to everyone. Joanna walked onto the stage. She looked out at the audience. She saw her mother in the front row, smiling. She saw General Cardoso, now retired, at the back of the room, arms crossed with a subtle smile. She opened her old notebook and began. 5 years ago, I sat in this same hall, invisible. Today, I'm here because someone chose to listen. And that changed everything, not just for me, but for all of us. She held up the notebook. This notebook is nothing special. It's old, stained, torn. But it taught me that knowledge doesn't need luxury. It needs attention, respect, opportunity. She looked directly at the audience. Today, I didn't come to talk about military strategies. I came to talk about social strategies, about how a country that ignores the intelligence of its invisible citizens is, in fact, sabotaging its own future, and about how, when we choose to listen, truly listen, entire armies can change direction. Applause erupted. It wasn't polite. It was thunderous, emotional, cathartic. General Cardoso stood up, and once again, he saluted. This time, not alone. The entire audience rose, civilians, military personnel, young, old, and together they saluted a young black woman who, 5 years earlier, was just the cleaner's daughter, but who, in reality, was always so much more. And so ends the story of Joanna, the girl who moved armies with an old notebook. But in truth, this story doesn't end. It continues in every invisible child, in every ignored piece of knowledge, in every time we choose to listen instead of silence. And you? What did you think of this story? Leave it in the comments if it made you reflect on something. And if you want to keep receiving narratives that inspire and transform, subscribe to the channel. Because every week we bring stories of dignity, resilience, and hope, stories that need to be told. Until next time, and remember, intelligence doesn't wear a uniform, it just needs to be seen.